This video is going to give an overview of the role of an HOA and how an HOA matures as the neighborhood matures. In the beginning, there may be very few houses in the development, and the HOA forms. They register as a not-for-profit corporation, and rather than hire a management company to manage such a small HOA, usually they will elect a board of directors to run the HOA from the neighborhood. There are not a lot of pressing concerns usually at that point because everything's new. They do need to make sure that the common areas get mowed and that some landscaping gets done in some of the common areas. Not a lot of pressing issues come up for the volunteer board of directors to deal with in the beginning. So we are going to take a look at what needs to be in place as the neighborhood matures. We're going to break down the responsibilities of a mature HOA in terms of these components. We've got the legal aspects, we've got finances. A reserve study is where you plan and get information about the long-term financial needs if you have something big like a road they have to maintain. And then there's insurance. Transparency, some of the transparency is dictated by the law. And then what should you have in an annual report to the members so that the members are aware of what the HOA is doing. There's all sorts of legal stuff that often the volunteer boards don't pay close attention to in the beginning because no issues ever arise. But it's important before the community matures to become aware of all the legal obligations of the board of the HOA. The HOA has its own governing documents, its restrictive covenants, and its bylaws. And then there are state statutes that will apply. The North Carolina Nonprofit Corporation Act and the North Carolina Planned Community Act may apply, depending on when you were formed. These legal documents can be overwhelming. You see, this one here is 82 pages long. But you've got to be consistent with everything in these documents in case there's an issue that comes up. And as your neighborhood matures, there may be issues that come up. And these documents, these state statutes dictate things like how you can vote, when you can do special assessments, or under what conditions you can do special assessments, all kinds of things that really matter. So at some point, it would be really smart to have a lawyer look over your documents and make sure that they're consistent with the state law. And the last thing here on the slide is fiduciary duties. That's the legal standard that the board is held to if something goes wrong. Roughly what that means is, did you act in a way that a reasonable small business person would have acted in the way that you're running the HOA? Now, one of the roles of the board is a treasurer, and the treasurer will oversee a lot of the financial issues. You've got state laws that govern certain things about how you have to do your finances, so it's important to be aware of those. There are certainly state laws that allow the members to view the records and financial documents. Some states require audits. North Carolina requires an audit after a certain point, but it's a good idea to have financial audits of your books occasionally. You may not need them every year if you're a small HOA, but maybe every 3 years or every 5 years. You should have a process for borrowing from your reserves in your governing documents, and this should include a payback schedule. And remember, you're being held to a fiduciary standard, so you want to have pretty clear financial processes. It's a good idea to have separation of duties. That's considered like a minimum standard. And separation of duties would include things like requiring the bank account reconciliation statement to be reviewed by a board member who has no check writing permissions on a regular basis, like monthly or something, and then sign it. And don't have the same person who approves invoices for payments write the checks. Require 2 signatures on all your checks, at least for checks over a certain amount. And then you also should know your long and short-term financial needs and create a proposed budget on a regular basis, like annually, for the members to vote on. A reserve study has 2 parts to it: physical analysis and a financial analysis. The board would hire a licensed professional to do the reserve study. This professional would prepare a report for you. The reserve study report will provide information about what repairs will need to be made in the future, what to do for road maintenance, how much it will cost, and a timeline for when these things will need to be done. And that way you can do a financial analysis to see if you're on track to be able to maintain the road on the schedule that it's going to need to be maintained on. And if you don't have a reserve study, so you don't have that information, and you're just planning on hoping for the best, which is not a very good plan, or doing a special assessment when needed. You can only do special assessments under certain conditions. And one of the conditions is that you have acted in your fiduciary duty to plan for the scheduled and needed road maintenance and collected the money on an ongoing basis rather than waiting until you need it and then doing an assessment. Some insurance is required by law and others are optional. These are the 5 different kinds of insurance that HOA should at least consider. The property insurance is required in North Carolina if the HOA has insurable common properties. Liability insurance is also required, and it's required in a reasonable amount, but they don't actually define what that is. So that's something that the board would be responsible for overseeing. The liability insurance protects against injuries on the common property. The board members, part of their fiduciary duty is to review these policies every year and make sure that they're adequate, sufficient, in good standing. And then there's directors and officers insurance. This is not required, but it's recommended, and this protects the board members and anyone who might be serving on a committee for the board against liability if they do something and are sued while they're serving. The fidelity insurance, this protects against theft or mismanagement of funds. And workman's comp insurance, you only need this as an HOA if you have any members that are doing work for the HOA. Workman's comp is fairly inexpensive, and a workman's comp lawsuit, if somebody gets hurt, like trimming the trees or something, they may not want to sue the HOA, but their insurance company might want to sue the HOA rather than pay. So workman's comp is inexpensive, and either you want to think about not letting members do work or taking out workman's comp insurance. And transparency fosters trust. There's a lot of different ways that you can promote transparency. The proposed budgets show the members how the money will be spent and let them have a say in it. If you share the reserve studies, then they know why the fees need to be what they are, and it's all above board, and it'll be much easier to get support if that is something that needs to be done. Having a website where you organize all the minutes, the documents, so that members can easily go back and check on things. And then an annual report to the members is another way that you can foster transparency to kind of give them the big picture of here's where we're at and here's what happened this year. An annual report to the members would be a good idea for fostering transparency and keeping the members informed and keeping their support for what's going on in the neighborhood. These are some things that you might include in an annual report: a description of any large capital expenditures that have recently happened or will in the near future, a statement of the total funds in the reserve account compared to what the reserve study predicts will be needed, revenue and expense statements for the end of year fiscal balance sheet, any status of any litigation, which hopefully there is none. And description of insurance policies is important because if people are going to volunteer to be on the board or to run for a board position, they need to know whether or not you've got that board and officer insurance that protects the board. Also, it's just a good idea for that all the members know what the status of the insurance policies are. And then the percentage of assessments that have been paid. So this has been an overview of what a small HOA eventually matures into. And it usually takes several years because when no issues arise in the beginning years, there's nothing that provides the catalyst for the board members to look into all of the different components of what is expected of an HOA. And if the neighborhood is small, it doesn't make sense in the beginning to hire a management company. And so the initial board members are usually people who volunteered to run to be board members. They're inexperienced. They have no training. There's no HOA board training provided because they are the HOA board and there's no one to provide it. And so it can take a while to get to the point where the HOA puts all these components in place. And when the HOA begins to mature, it's very important to have the support of the members to put all these different components in place so that you build a strong foundation to move forward from there. And it's very rare that that happens in the very beginning stages.